Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. Roelof Meyer is in our studio and in the Upper Echelon this week, a gentleman well known to South Africans through a variety of contributions he's made to society. But Roelof, I was interested to find out that you actually come from Vicksburg in the Free State. You were a Free Stater, certainly growing up, going to school there, going to university at the University of the Free State, and you studied law. Now, lawyers tend to either stay in the law or go into business. You decided to go into politics, and even when the political scene changed dramatically, which you helped to do, you stayed in the public service. Was this something to do with your upbringing?
Maybe it is, Alec. When I grew up as a youngster, it was in the 1950s, 1960s, and the Afrikaner in particular still suffered economic consequences of earlier times, the Great Depression of the 1930s, etc. And my family was part of that struggle. And so when, in the 1960s and thereafter, I started to become more aware of things and what is happening in the country when I went to university and so forth, that inclination of becoming involved in the public life or national life of the country, I think has always been there. And quite frankly, I think I had at the back of my mind always that I'm going to go into politics at some stage. That was my preferred end career, I think, without saying when or determining exactly at what stage.
But you made some changes, leaving the government of national unity. I think most people on earth would love to serve in a cabinet under Nelson Mandela. You did, and then you left. Joining the UDM, you worked together with Bantu Holomisa there, started a new party which could have had so much promise to begin with, and then you left. So what was it that shaped those big decisions in your life?
Well, I think first of all I just have to correct one reference, and that is that leaving the government of national unity was a decision by F.W. de Klerk at that stage, with which I didn't agree. Personally, I would have thought that we should have continued in the government of national unity, and most likely it would have stayed on for much longer than the determined 5-year period that was prescribed in the interim constitution. So it was a little bit unfortunate. Well, not a little bit. It was significantly unfortunate that we left the government of national unity.
Couldn't you have then switched to the ANC and maybe stayed? That would have been quite a political statement.
Well, I left the National Party, started the UDM with Bantu Holomisa. What I think later on I realized I should have done was to stay out of politics for a while after I left the National Party because of the decision to leave the government of national unity. And then maybe after a year or two joined the ANC. I couldn't do it immediately because that was just not on. It would have created a completely wrong perception and understanding of what was at the back of my mind. So I left the National Party, joined Bantu. It was a wonderful experience for me to work with Bantu, bringing me into the townships, into the black constituency, so to speak, which I've never had that experience of until then. So it exposed me to a new phase of my public life, which I'm still very grateful about. But then, unfortunately, after a while, not unfortunately, but unfortunately maybe in terms of my continuation of politics, I realized that I've reached my point of saturation, so to speak, and that is why I decided to leave politics altogether at the beginning of 2000. So it was a change of life for me. I came to the end of my political career, and I decided, well, I'm going into something different, which mainly became business for the last 12 years.
It's interesting, and we'll get into your business field in a moment. I was reading something this morning from the Harvard Business Review, where they were talking about how do you pick a successor? Well, you go for the one who is not narcissistic, in other words, not overly ambitious and not wanting glory for themselves. If anything, you've been completely the other way. If someone could criticize you, it's perhaps a lack of ambition publicly.
I won't say I was without ambition. All politicians have ambition. That's undoubtedly the case. And throughout my upbringing, during my student days as a student leader and thereafter, it was quite clear in my own mind that I have an ambition to become a politician and eventually to climb the ladder, so to speak, of different leadership positions in the then ruling party, which was the National Party. So I was not without ambition, but a determining factor for me was not necessarily to hang on to a position and or work for the next opportunity without serving what was uppermost in my mind in terms of the best interest for the country. So one can argue to say that, if I would have not contributed to the changes in South Africa, I might have been in a higher position than would have been the case otherwise. But that would serve no purpose. It was not in the interest of the country to go that route. It was in the interest of the country to find a peaceful settlement, and I feel extremely grateful about the fact that I was there at that moment when that happened and could make a contribution in that regard. That's the highest reward that I could get out of my life, so to speak.
Millions feel the same way, there's no doubt. Interesting again, your history. We're talking now to someone who's in the history books of South Africa. How does that feel?
Well, history speaks for itself. And it is not that was an ambition at all. I was fortunate to be in a position where I experienced a paradigm shift, so to speak, in my own life. I come from a very conservative background. That was the nature of being an Afrikaner in the 1950s, 1960s. That was the kind of generation that I come from. But at the same time, I had the benefit of realizing the mistakes that have been made, realizing that what we were busy with was totally unjustifiable. And based on that, my own change started to emerge. I'm talking about specifically the 1980s. So that by the time the change started to happen, at the end of 1989, at the beginning of 1990, I was on the other side. My own paradigm had shifted from where I was protecting minority rights, protecting group rights in South Africa. I was now suddenly on the other side, realizing that the total existence of South Africa depends on our realization of equal rights for all in the country. And that is where, I had the opportunity to come in based on that change that took place in my own mindset, that paradigm shift that occurred. I could make that contribution in bringing about the new dispensation for the country.
In a broader perspective, because much of your life has been punctuated by seeing people change. You've worked all over the world helping peace processes go through. What is it, maybe drawing on your own experience, and what is it that gets people to make that mindset shift?
There are two things, I think, Alec. The one is the pragmatic nature of change, where people would realize that you can't go on forever like it is, because the situation is going to lead, like in our case, to civil war. So the pragmatic realization that was clear in the minds of F.W. de Klerk and others at the end of the 1980s is absolutely speaking for itself. But then there's also the other part, like I spoke about, the paradigm shift that has occurred. And that paradigm shift for us in South Africa occurred at the moment that we realized that what was the dominant factor in our being up till then, for more than 300 years, namely a feeling and a position of superiority amongst the white minority against the black majority, had to change, and that we had to find the basis of equal ground and equality for all. Those were the dominant moments, I think, in our change. If I look at other countries and in places of conflict where I've traveled and visited in the last 15 years, I would say, if they can take the lessons from what we have experienced, it can help them. And it goes back to three things in my mind, many others, but specifically three things, and that is the nature of the inclusive solution that we found in South Africa. In other words, all and everybody that contributed to the conflict were in the end part of the solution. Secondly, the fact that we worked and realized the basis of trust between the key role players on both sides, as opponents, as enemies previously. But we came together, developed respect and understanding of each other, which led to trusting each other. I'm talking now specifically about the level of trust that existed between Cyril Ramaphosa and myself, for instance, during that period and afterwards, still today. And then thirdly, the nature of taking ownership of the problem, but also ownership of the content of the solution, designing a process to how to get out of this conflict is part of that ownership. And then how to realize the outcome and the settlement is part of that ownership. So South Africans were particularly engaged with each other in finding that common ground, finding the way forward, finding the solution on the basis of the ownership that we took about our own problems that prevailed.
Those 3 steps, or those 3 principles that you talk about, have you applied them elsewhere? Kosovo, Sri Lanka, Rwanda, some of these countries that have had potentially even worse situations than we had here in South Africa, that you've been called in to try and help?
Yes, I think the most successful example that we have been engaged with was Northern Ireland. When we were first invited to go to Northern Ireland was just after our own transition in 1994 already. And for the following 10 years or more, myself and others were involved in Northern Ireland, sharing our experience, talking to Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness on the one side, and David Trimble, and later on Peter Robinson and others on the other side, on the side of the Unionists. And, it was magnificent the other day to see how the Queen and Martin McGuinness were shaking hands as the final almost stamp on the peace process in Northern Ireland. And I think that was the most successful example that we were involved with in sharing our experience. There were others, unfortunately, that were not successful in that regard. And it's a pity to observe still that if they could have just taken the South African experience on board, it could have been differently. And I'm talking here about Sri Lanka specifically, but there are others as well.
You mentioned Cyril Ramaphosa. You are coupled on the tote in most people's minds. What is not well known is that your business operation, Fever Tree Consulting, is in fact chaired by Cyril Ramaphosa. So how did you manage in his busy schedule to twist his arm to get involved with you there?
Well, I think it was at the right moment that I approached him. That was back in 2006 when this opportunity occurred to establish a niche business in the consulting arena, business consulting arena. And when I approached Cyril and said, here is this opportunity, would you like to participate? And he immediately agreed. If I had to go to him today about that same proposition, the answer would have probably been no, for different reasons, because Shanduka is now a major participant in the South African investment environment. So I think there are different reasons why it came about at that stage, and we were very successful with Fever Tree. Both of us have now pulled out of it and stepped aside, but it was for 6 years, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
It still shares some of your values, or your perceived values: hard work, work-life balance. We share something else. We both lost a child. Your daughter died 10 years ago now.
Correct.
Going through that process, the process of change in South Africa, the process of losing a child, did something come out of that that's actually changed your life?
I think the whole process of change in South Africa, enriched me hugely. It brought about different understandings of the environment that we live in, but also of oneself, undoubtedly. It enriched me to understand, like all of us said at the time of signing the interim constitution in 1993, this is the moment of liberation for all of us. It was on the basis of what I've experienced during the negotiation, during that period of transition, that I could say that. It was a liberation for myself, not only for the people that the settlement was directed to only. So I think those experiences benefited myself hugely, and it changed my perception and my understanding. And through many other ways, I've learned a lot. My daughter and I, who passed, had a wonderful relationship during the last year of her life. And it came about because of the understanding of reconciliation that that we both experienced, the need for that. She from her side and myself, and as a result of which we had the most intimate father-daughter relationships during that last part of her life. And I'm very grateful that that was the case. And it came about because of my earlier experience also during the negotiations. So even today, although the pain will never go away about her passing, I can look back at her and saying to myself, it was a good time that she passed because of that experience that I had between the two of us.
These experiences that you've packed into 65 years?
Yes.
Birthday yesterday?
Indeed.
We're privileged to have you here.
Thank you.
Remember with the Beatles, when I'm 64, well, you're past that now. Is it very different to what you might have anticipated as a young LLB at Free State University?
I'm not sure. You know, it's difficult. Somebody asked me recently, what is the best decade of your life, referring to me? And I said, after thinking for 2 seconds, I said, it's now. This decade is the best of my life. And I think that's how one should live. That is how one should experience. I live a completely full life. I'm getting up early in the morning. I go to bed late in the evening, and I enjoy it, what I'm doing. But I'm also taking my regular breaks. I have the ability to now make the time choices to say if I want to have a break of 2 weeks at a time, I can do so. And that's wonderful.
Roelof, I've been picking up an undercurrent of concern amongst people in the business sector, and clearly you engage as regularly with business people and are in the sector yourself. Do you think that it's often exaggerated, the fears that people have? And perhaps just to elaborate on that, that if we all went back to 1994, if we went back to 1994 today and sketched the South Africa we live in 2012, I don't think there's a single person in this country who would say, wow, we've come a lot further than we anticipated. But maybe memories fade. I
think so. I think so. If we look at the situation immediately prior to the transition in 1994, I'm talking about the first democratic election, there was much more skepticism, much more fear, much more uncertainty at that stage than there is today. And we succeeded to overcome that. So much also we can do it today. In my mind, if I answer this question particularly to some of the students at Gibbs, where I'm involved, it always, my response would always be that there is a center that holds us together in South Africa. And I've seen it so many times since the early beginnings of the process of transition. I'm talking about the early 1990s, when we had the first meeting with the ANC in 1990, and thereafter all the time. And now still, I'm absolutely convinced that there is a center that holds us together. So what it means is that they are on the fringes, always competing factors. And it appears in different ways, in different formats from time to time. We've seen it recently on the margins where there were attacks against the center within the ANC, for instance. But the overarching strength of the center is strong enough to keep us forward, to keep us going. And I think we will see it now again. Why are people uncertain at the moment? It's because of the uncertainty in terms of what will be the outcome of Mangaung, for instance. I don't think it's a major issue. I think the center is there and it will stay together and it will keep us going. What the end result of that theory or that thesis that I'm talking about is that maybe the country is not performing as well as it should. Maybe we should put more emphasis into the need for clearer and stronger direction and leadership. Because in the end, I keep on saying that South Africa is an underperforming going concern, which means that in business terms we're making profit, but we can succeed much better in terms of our margins. And it's probably as a result of a lack of sufficient clear direction, sufficient leadership of where we should go and what we should do. But this is the nature of the holding together of the center, because I think what I'm talking about is that if your approach is to say, let's hold the center together so that it can remain strong, it means you're making compromises to keep that center together and to keep it strong. And that means that you try to please different segments and different ways of thinking. And I think this sometimes leads to a misunderstanding of where we are and what we are supposed to achieve.
You've just turned 65. That's the retirement age. Are you retiring? Are you going to be taking things easier?
I've discussed this with a friend of mine of the same age recently. and we said to each other, you know, when we were younger, 55 was the retirement age at that stage, at least for civil servants. Then it moved to 60. Now we are at 65, and generally speaking, it is seen as a retirement age. We have seen CEOs who had to depart in recent years because they've reached that age, or whatever the cut-off limit in many companies is to be. But where I am at the moment, I feel, yes, I would like to plan my own space a little bit better time-wise, to decide when I want to take a 2 weeks break, that type of thing. But at the same time, I want to remain engaged. I want to be fully involved in whatever opportunities might occur, and it's exactly where I am. So I'm looking at the next 5 years at least.
Are you traveling as much?
I used to travel quite a lot, and then as a result of my involvement with Fevertree and otherwise, that had to be reduced. Now what I've experienced in the last year or so is that there is an increase in traveling again, because there are opportunities where one is called upon to come and share our experience, to make an input and so forth. And wherever I can and wherever the time allows, I do take it up, and it gives me a nice challenge. It gives me a nice opportunity, but I don't want to do it in such a way that it takes away my focus from the South African scene. And there are many things that I'm still involved with in South Africa, like, for instance, the Defence Review Committee, which I've been chairing the last year, which was a wonderful opportunity for me as an ex-Minister of Defence of 20 years ago, to be brought back into the arena and space and to try and make a contribution, which I've done to my best. And it was a wonderful opportunity, and I want to complete that task.
And land reform?
Land reform.
Being a farmer's son, it must be close to your heart.
It's been very close to my heart, the subject, for a long time, because I could see the failures in the current land reform, or the effects of the current land reform policies. And so I approached Gwedi Mantashe, the Secretary General of the ANC, on the subject this year. And I said to him, you know, it worries me because the state is throwing money into the subject and without any results from it. Land has been bought up, transferred to communities that claim the land, and then the land becomes totally underutilized or not utilized at all. So there's no commercial value that goes with it. And nobody is benefiting from it, not even the claimants. And as a result of which, him and I then decided, let's get together the top farmers, or a representative group of top farmers in the country, so that we have a conversation and ask them what can be done about this, to help particularly new farmers growing themselves into becoming seriously commercial farmers. So we had an excellent conversation on the subject a few weeks ago, and as a result of which we are now working on a policy draft that could change this whole approach for government. The next step would be a workshop in August. I was fortunate to be asked to facilitate that discussion that we had with the farmers. We had 40 top farmers of the country around the table for a whole day with Gwedi Mantashe in his capacity as Secretary General of the ANC, together with other senior leadership from the ANC side. And it was a wonderful occasion to see how there is a meeting of minds. I almost felt myself back in the days of the negotiations, where I could see how a meeting of minds can emerge in such a discussion. And I'm confident that we're going to come about with a policy direction that could change the whole debate that is currently not constructive, that is currently not contributing to anything, and that is two sides speaking about the subject but without meeting each other. So I think this can make a difference, and I'm excited about it.
And that keeps the spring in your step?
Absolutely.
Roelof Meyer, former politician and now making a contribution in civil society.